Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome back to the Data Science Hangout. Let's see if we remember how to do this today. We were on a little bit of a break for July, but so excited to see everybody back here. Hope everyone's having a great week. If this is your first time joining us today, I know this is a pretty big group here today. So it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for spending your Thursday with all of us. If we haven't met yet, I'm Rachel Dempsey. I lead our pro community here at Posit. And the Data Science Hangout is our open space to chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and getting to hear about what's going on in the world of data across different industries. And so every Thursday, we feature a different data leader from the community. And together, we're all dedicated to making this a welcoming environment for everybody. So we love hearing from everyone in this environment, no matter your level of experience or area of work. This is a casual conversation with us all here. So it's totally okay to just listen in too. But there's always 3 ways that you could jump in and ask questions or provide your own perspective too. So you can jump in by raising your hand on Zoom. You can put questions in the Zoom chat. And feel free to always put a little star next to it if you wanted me to read it instead. Maybe you're in a coffee shop or something. Or I could call on you to ask your question and introduce yourself. And then lastly, we also have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously. And Hannah or someone from the team will share that in the chat. Oh, you already did. Thank you. Well, I am so excited to be joined by my co-host today for the Data Science Hangout, Hadley Wickham. Hadley is Chief Scientist at Posit and builds tools to make data science easier, faster, and more fun. You might know Hadley's work for packages like tidyverse, including ggplot2 and dplyr, and much more. But Hadley, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Maybe tell us something you like to do outside of work too, and a little bit about what it means to be chief scientist here at Posit.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, Rachel, for finally inviting me. It's starting to get a little hurtful, but glad I could finally make it.
Thanks for joining us.
Like outside of work, I'd say here's I have a dog. That's Lola. She's a 13-year-old Shar Pei, and that's pretty much what she does these days, is sleep. I write books. I've got one at my This is one of my books that I wrote recently, to the cocktail book, because I'm also really into cocktails. This was because I'm me, all the data for the cocktails is stored in a YAML file, and then it uses Quarto to turn it into a book. And I'll show you, because this is sort of kind of, so it has like a table of contents, like the primary organization of the book is by spirit. But because I'm extra, it also has one index that lists all of the primary ingredients in the cocktail. So if you want to find like something to use orange liqueur, and then finally, it has an index by name. So if you remember the name of the cocktail, I want to find it. So these are like fixing the things that like annoy me about cocktail books, that you can never find the cocktail that you're looking for because they're ordered in some like arbitrary thing and the indexes are so bad. So thanks to the power of Quarto and LaTeX and Make Index, it was really easy to make a super highly indexed book with a few ASCIIs.
I have to ask you, what's your favorite from that book?
The cocktail I'm enjoying the most at the moment. I'm not actually in that book because I've only discovered them recently, and I can't even remember what it's called, but it uses it's rum. It's an equal parts cocktail. There's rum, fire, Aperol, yellow chartreuse, and lime juice. And rum fire is this kind of like crazy overproof Jamaican rum.
Sounds great. I see there's a lot of fans here in the chat. But Hadley, would love to have you share with everybody here, what does it actually mean to be chief scientist at Posit? What do you do on a daily basis?
Good question. So like, these days I manage a team, the tidyverse team, who's responsible for kind of not only the tidyverse packages, but also many of the packages and the package development ecosystem. So test that in DevTools, use this and Roxygen, and then also some kind of lower level packages that underpin these things, which often live in the OWL GitHub organization. But like management is not my passion. I would say I do okay, but it's not like what I really enjoy, and it's not where I want to spend my time. So I try and still spend as much time as I possibly can, like writing both code and books. So I recently kind of realized I felt like I hadn't been like getting that much done, and I think it felt like I just sort of recognized that felt like it was probably mostly in my head. But then I realized the key reason I felt that way is that I wasn't working on a book project. So like when I am working on a book, I always get up and that's the first thing I do for the first hour or two in the morning. And now I seem to be like addicted to writing books, so that when I'm not writing a book, I feel weird and uncomfortable. So now that I've started work on the next book, which is going to be called something like Tidy Design Principles, things are feeling much better. So yeah, so I do some management, I like writing books, and then obviously like writing code. And recently, the packages I've been working on are not tidyverse packages, but I've just been kind of diving in around Posit, various open source packages, and kind of seeing where I can pitch in and help out. So about a year ago, I guess, or longer, I helped out on the pins package. And then more recently, I've been working on the RS Connect package, which helps you deploy your apps to connect, and the RN package, which helps you create reproducible environments for your R code.
So if anybody ever feels like you're not doing enough, write a book, right?
And I will say, my advice for writing a book is that it's easy. You just have to write for an hour, or it's simple, I should say. You just have to write for an hour every day for a year, and at the end of it, you have a book. And as far as I know, no one has ever successfully followed that advice. So, not very good advice.
So we have a really big crew here today. So I'm going to repeat how people can like ask questions and jump into, because I know a few people joined after. And it's so nice to see you all here. If this is your first time joining, so nice to meet you. This is an informal, casual conversation with us all here. So you can ask questions and chat with us in a variety of ways. So you could raise your hand on Zoom and I'll be able to see that. You can put questions in the Zoom chat. And then Hannah will share a Slido link again here where you can ask questions anonymously too. Just want to make sure I said that in case somebody joined after I put it there. But I see Mike Smith, you had a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in here first?
Yeah, thanks. So this is, I don't know if you can answer it directly, Hadley, but if you can kind of give us a feel for it. So the tidyverse is huge. It's a massive number of packages, massive number of developers. How does Posit kind of herd the cats in making sure that all of these different development pieces come together and work together effectively?
Yeah, I'd say most of that is just like we talk a lot amongst the team, and we talk pretty frequently about when we're designing APIs, like why do we favor this design over that design? Like if we've got something that's important or complex, like that's something we'll talk over in a team meeting. And that is like having multiple people think about these problems, I think is just the key, because it really is past the point that any one person can keep it all in their head. And it's very easy to accidentally introduce inconsistencies because you've forgotten how some function you wrote 10 years ago works. So just like that, a lot of, we're a pretty close-knit team that works closely together. That's really important. The other thing, which I'm working on, which I can pop a link to in the chat, is this book called Tidy Design Principles. which is where like now I'm trying to write up some of these principles, which is like useful, it's useful for us because it codes them in writing and we can look them up. But it was also hopefully useful for the community. So you can both like see the patterns we follow and get more of a glimpse into kind of like how we think about these things. So the goal is to have both kind of, these are things you should do, but also like this is what we were thinking when we designed this interface. Like these are the things, like these are the trade-offs we considered. These are all of the options we considered. This is why we rejected this one or preferred this one. And then, looking back now, like, do we regret those choices? Like, would we have made different choices if we knew then what we knew now?
I was waiting to see if you had a follow-up there, Mike. I saw you nodding. I see.
Talking is definitely, the A1 tip, but I can imagine that, from a project management perspective, it must be difficult to ensure that all of these things just, because they're like Lego pieces. You want them to just clip together, right?
Yeah, and definitely something we spend a lot of time thinking about.
So I see quite a few questions starting to come in now here. Andy, I see you asked a question in the chat about some of the books. Do you want to jump in here?
Yes, thanks. Just Hadley, I saw you, I think, post on LinkedIn the other day or somewhere about the upcoming book. Is there a difference between the design principles and say like the R cookbook or R recipes, or is it kind of an extension of those?
Yeah, so I don't know, I've written a lot of books about R now, but I would say like, I think of like R for data science is like, if you want to learn how to do data science in R. Advanced R is if you want to learn how R works as a programming language. And there's kind of this gap in between them. Like, how do you go from, someone being a data scientist who's analyzing like individual data sets to someone who's starting to design like kind of bigger pieces of code, like functions that you can use in multiple analyses, or maybe eventually you collect enough of those functions you want to do a package. So how do you, like when you're writing a function, like what do you think about? Like how do you pick the arguments? How do you name the arguments? How do you choose how they should interact? So hopefully, I think this is not, this is a book that's, you've got to be fairly far along in your journey with R and data science, because now you're wanting to write bigger functions. But I think this is sort of a gap in the current selection of R books, which compared to other programming languages, just have far fewer books on kind of like, general programming topics like design.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question over from Slido. And as a reminder, you can ask questions anonymously there too. But one was, have you learned anything particularly noteworthy about the Python community and or space since Posit's rebranding?
Yes. I don't know, I don't know how to put this without seeming mean, but I don't know, it just feels like the Python data science, but it's just like so hard to do data science in Python. It's like so many things that are like annoying, from like the environment management problem to doing things that I feel like they should be simple in pandas to like, I don't know, just it feels like I'm sort of continue to be amazed that people are as productive as they are in Python with the tools they have on hand. And so I think one of the things I'm kind of excited about is like Posit, starts to contribute to this space, is how can we kind of bring our magic of like, it just works into this space so that people can just like do data science in Python without having to worry about all of these kind of extraneous things that aren't that interesting to data scientists.
Thank you. Smita, I see you had asked a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so this is a question for Hadley. When you design packages, how do you factor in security given the increasing number of hacking and other attacks that are happening in the enterprise space these days? Thank you.
Yeah, security is a difficult one because I think in most of the tidyverse, it just doesn't like really apply. Like, you don't have to worry about security in ggplot2, for example. Like we think about it more in the packages that have to require authentication. So typically, when you're getting data, whether that's from an API or a database, you're going to need to store those credentials somehow. And one of the things I've been thinking about in particular recently, as I've been working more on like, using our pro products, is like how do you make sure those credentials travel kind of both seamlessly and securely from wherever you're doing the analysis to wherever you're deploying the analysis. So currently, I think we're at the stage where it's a lot around like, how do we help users learn the right conventions? Like, you should never be typing your password into the console, because if you do that, it's easy for it to end up saved in your .r history file, and it's easy to accidentally commit that to Git, and now you've shared your password with a much wider range of people than you should be. So at the moment, there's, I think, a lot of use of environment variables, which are a little bit safer, at least because you're not storing them literally in your code. But how can we do better at, providing tools for saving those securely, and then when needed, like sharing them across from your computer to Connect or to Shiny apps or whatever. So I think lots of questions there, not a lot of answers currently.
Sanjay, I see you had a question in the chat earlier too. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Hi, Hadley. One thing which always intrigued me is our company always looked at purchasing the Posit RStudio Connect or Posit Connect, but we never got a proper sales pitch. And could you articulate what advantages Posit RStudio Connect has over the open source version, please?
Yeah, so I would say like the reason why you want Connect, or it's kind of like main value proposition to me, is it helps get your data analyses out of the hands of data scientists and into the hands of decision makers. And at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter how awesome you are as a data scientist unless you can show your results to people, your analyses to people in your organization who actually need them. And so Connect is really about like publishing whatever you're doing in R to a form that other people in your organization can see, whether it's like Shiny apps or R marketing or Quarto documents, or if you want to turn those into like a scheduled report so that people are getting emailed at 9 a.m. every day with the latest results on your dashboard. It's all about like sharing what you're doing as a data scientist. And ideally, like the goal of Connect, which we're not like 100% of the way there, but we're trying to get there in the long run. Very much the goal is to be able to do that just by like pushing a button in your RStudio, wherever you're doing the analysis. It should just be a single click or a single function call to get that up, so you can stay focused on the data analysis rather than having to worry about like running a web server, securing a web server, make sure all the authentication is working, make sure your email jobs are getting sent out correctly, and when those jobs fail that you get notified that they didn't work, and all that kind of other stuff, which is like really necessary for a product like this to work, but probably you don't care about as a data scientist. And thinking about it just gets in the way of doing your most important work.
But quite a lot of it is achieved from RStudio open source server also, isn't it?
Right, like yes, like you can be doing the analysis in the open source products, but there's no open source tool that's quite the same as Connect. You can certainly string it together with a bunch of different open source products, but I think our belief would be it's going to cost you much less time and much less money to just buy this thing that we have built, where the cost of building it is amortized over thousands of customers, rather than you having to pay that cost yourself by developing the open source solutions from scratch.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for all these great questions coming in. Libby, I see you just asked one that is getting so many hearts and reactions right now, so I'm going to have you jump in here to ask that.
Sure. I'm always swooping in with the touchy-feely questions. When JJ was on, he gave you a lot of credit for the culture at our studio, now Posit. And so I was kind of wondering if there was anything that you did, any steps that you took to kind of make sure that our studio moved that direction or kind of could embody the stuff that you hoped culture-wise.
I'm laughing just because I think that's like classic JJ, because I think he's way more responsible for the culture than I am. But, you know, I will say, I think the thing that both JJ and I share is that I think, like, while we are both like really good programmers, that we don't believe that makes us like better human beings in any way. It's just a skill that we happen to have. And that I think, you know, as people with these skills, it's our responsibility to help the people that we can help with them. And it's just been so wonderful working with JJ and Tarif and the whole leadership team at Posit over the last 10 years, because I think that those values are really strongly instilled now in our company culture, that like we try and do the right thing. You know, we're a B Corp because we don't want to optimize for, you know, short-term profits. We want to be in this for the long term. We want to be able to make the right decisions that help us out and the community out in the long term, not just do what's exigent in the moment.
Thank you. Okay, jumping over to one on Slido is, what gaps do you see in the R ecosystem? For example, most deep learning and AI applications are built with PyTorch, TensorFlow, and Keras. Do you see R catching up?
Yeah, I don't see R catching up there. I think the Python, there's just such a huge community there that R is never going to catch up, and that's fine. Like, R doesn't have to be good at everything. R is not Python. R can be good at like a set of really important tasks. It doesn't have to embrace everything, and it can do that because, you know, R is fundamentally the sort of glue language, that there's no sense amongst R users that R must be the only language you use. You use it as much as it helps you, and then you use the tools like Reticulate to talk to Python, and a lot of the built-in stuff for talking to C and C++, and new stuff for talking to Rust and Go. That, you know, you talk to whatever systems your data lives in from R, and then you benefit from this environment that I believe is just unparalleled for fluid, interactive data exploration.
Jesse, I see you had a question in the chat a bit earlier. Do you want to jump in here? And at some point, because we have so many, I might need to say first and last names. But it's Jesse Osman. I can ask the question. If you want to add any context, feel free. But the question was, when writing books using Cordo, are there any helper packages that you would use to help format those files to actually look like books? And how do you get those Cordo files print ready?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer depends a lot on kind of exactly what your target is for the book and kind of where your skills lie. So like for the cocktails book, that's self-published, hopefully, obviously. I'm not signing up with cocktail book publishers. And I did that a lot of that is kind of custom, like it uses Corto, but it did a lot of customization with LaTeX, using my limited LaTeX skills and much Googling and some ChatGPT to get things working. But other stuff like if you're publishing with O'Reilly, now Cordo can output the ASCII doc, which is what O'Reilly uses. Other publishers, like more scientific publishers, you'll need to create a PDF, typically using LaTeX, and then you'll need to do some customization yourself. I think like that tool change from LaTeX to PDF is kind of still the best formed route. Obviously, it requires some understanding of LaTeX. I will say that is both like impossible to gain any meaningful understanding of LaTeX without probably decades of work. But fortunately, like Googling and copying and pasting and some fair amount of frustration will typically find what you want, because pretty much everything you want, someone has already done. And it's just a matter of like finding the right snippet to paste in and hope it doesn't conflict with the other snippets that you pasted in. I think like LaTeX is definitely in the past. I think we're seeing kind of more tools like Page Down, where you can render like, you know, PDF kind of quality outputs using HTML engines. That, you know, I think solves one set of problems and introduces another. Now you've got to learn some like CSS for customization. But I think we'll see more and more of that in the future. I also just don't really think about, like, I still think like the primary version of my books is the online version. I think that is what most people read, and I just think about the physical books as kind of like a nice offshoot that I honestly don't really care about, because I do not read physical books anymore. So I know some people do it. It's nice to have them, but it's just the online version I think is so much more important.
I love all of this conversation happening in the chat right now too. And just want to say, if you're joining us for the first time, that's where a lot of people end up meeting each other too, and like sharing helpful links with each other too. So feel free to jump in there. And thank you to the Posit folks in the back end who are helping me pull out some of the questions from there. Alan, I see you had asked a, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Can I pull one out?
Yeah,
So someone asked you about these, which are actually embroidery X logos by Shala Galfan. So I have a lot of, I don't know, things like that you might see my like a Koshi distribution Halloween.
Love it.
Plushie.
I'm thinking back to the hex dress that I saw at the RStudio conference one time. All the amazing things people make with the hexes.
I think the most impressive comp-related thing I saw was like someone had like tidyverse hexes painted on their nails that they'd done themselves. Like that was really, really impressive to do it that small.
Absolutely. Alan, I see you had a question here in the chat. Do you want to jump in?
I do. I put in a couple, Rachel. Were you eyeballing a specific one?
You could ask your favorite one, but I see that people were upvoting your B Corp question.
I'll go with the most recent one. Yeah, the B Corp one. I'm curious, Hadley, if in the B Corp landscape, are there peers that look like Posit or doing similar things, or are you alone? And like, what's that like to either have some sort of well-trod ground to follow, or is it figuring out like every day, like strategically, what does Posit as a B Corp do in this kind of situation? And and I'm sort of curious if that's like liberating or if it's terrifying. Like what's that like kind of to think about operationally being in that space?
I'd say we do some benchmarking against other B Corps in the places where benchmarks are typically available. Like I know we do like our employee kind of satisfaction surveys. We benchmark those against other B Corps. But I don't really know if there are B Corps like us. I suspect there are not. There are just not that many like software B Corps there are not that many open source companies. And I guess that, I don't know, that feels kind of like more freeing to me than worrying. You know, certainly a lot of what we do is just a standard, you know, there's a lot of, it's just kind of standard software business playbook. But at the same time, we don't have this, like, more about removing this drive to optimize short-term profitability that gives us the room to kind of, you know, do the things that we believe to be right, you know, as much as possible. It's not always possible to, you know, it's like what is right is a very complicated question, especially as the size of a company grows. But certainly we have the more freedom to kind of think about that and act on that. And while, you know, certainly we still make mistakes, I think everyone is, you know, trying the absolute best.
Thanks, appreciate hearing that.
Ian Waris, I see you asked a question here in the chat. Do you want to jump in next?
Sure, I'll hop on real quick. And good effort on the last name.
Oh, sorry.
No,
You tell me how to say it.
It's like Ferris, just with a W.
Okay.
So you've taken a lot of solutions to massive pain points that are challenging and non-obvious. I know if I tried to do something like ggplot, I would make no progress whatsoever. So I wonder, how do you find your starting points for implementation? Like, where do you start from and how do you measure your progress and make sure you're moving towards your end goal?
Good question. It feels like a lot of the packages that I work on just have this sense of inevitability about them. But these are just things that like frustrate me and typically have frustrated me for years before like some kind of solution crystallizes in my head. And then it's just a matter of like a lot of iteration. And now I think one of the huge advantages I have is that there's a community of people who are willing to try out like whatever crap I produce and give me like feedback and tell me like, this doesn't work, or this, I don't understand this, or this is inconsistent with another tidyverse thing. And that is just, I find that kind of interaction, like personally, like, highly motivating, that people care. When people care enough to like critique it, I find that to be, really motivating. So I think that it's just that, I don't know, some weird part of my brain that is just like collecting these little pain points, and after a while kind of realizing that all of these pain points, like maybe there's some root cause that I can fix all at once. Other times it's like, let's just rough, knock them off one by one and then hope something falls out. Yeah, and there's just this, I still feel like a lot of packages, it just feels like, I feel like there's a sort of compulsion to create them that occurs inside of me at some points in my life.
All right, so it feels like you're a force of nature then.
Yeah.
So a Slido question somebody had asked was, do you have any recommendations for teaching non-coder data generators that it's good to use tidy structured data so we can use their data so much more easily?
Yeah, I think the challenge with teaching anything like this is always you have to figure out what are the benefits to them, not what are the benefits to you, because the benefits to you are typically very obvious but are not motivating to other people. So you need to figure out like what's some angle where by adopting these new ideas, can they save themselves work? Or can they produce something cool? And maybe that's like, if it's not about saving, if you can't find any way that it's going to save them work, maybe there's something you can do with the tidy beta automatically to produce some kind of useful plot or motivating figure that will kind of help them say like, oh, this is kind of fun. So I think, like try and make it easier or try and make it more fun. Anything else, like it's a hard road to get other people to change their minds and to change their processes.
David Meza, I see you asked a question in the chat. You want to jump in here next?
I did, and I apologize. My video's not working. Hey, Hadley, how you doing?
Hey.
Good. One of the questions, I had two questions. One of them was around tidy models and Vetiver. You've done a lot of good work on trying to expand the MLOps in an organization. Any thoughts or about what may be happening in the future? How do we can get better MLOps in organizations using Posit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think our sort of hope is like as we get better at integrating our open source tools and our professional tools, some of that would just kind of happen naturally. I think that's, one of the things we're struggle with as an organization is like, how do we help these like fairly disparate teams with quite different cultures like work together and create solutions that work for people out in the real world. So I think that sort of feels to me like where the missing pieces are. Like we want to deliver these like end-to-end solutions which like just work, and if we can make model deployment really easy, model deployment and monitoring really easy for you, hopefully people will use it more.
Thank you.
Seeing a lot of chat about hex tattoos, different Posit in our studio
I'll show you.
tattoos in there.
It's not exactly tattoos. I'll show you this other. This is one of my favorites. It's a gift from my friend and colleague Winston. It says, in case, it's kind of hard to see that, in case of emergency, break glass, and it's brass knuckles with tidy on one and data on the other. So.
Nice. Let's see. So many great questions here. Trying to get to everybody's. I see Jake, Jake Riley, you asked a question here in the chat.
Oh yeah. I know that there's other packages under the tidyverse, like Lubridate was a separate package that you would have to load instead of tidyverse was now included. I was curious how you pick which packages come along, and I'm hoping Glue is next.
Glue is not next because you can already kind of get to it using str glue because that's re-imported through. Like Glue is a little bit of a tricky candidate because it was kind of designed to be, well, maybe, yeah, I think Glue, I don't know, Glue just feels like too small to be like at this level, especially when you can get to like 95% of the functionality via str_glue. So generally, yeah, I think like the tidyverse now is, I don't see any much likelihood that membership is going to change in the next couple of years, just because Lubridate, that's been a goal to get Lubridate into the tidyverse for, like something like 5 years now, and finally kind of all the like various bits that we had to deprecate and fix in various places kind of felt mature enough we could pull the trigger on that. But so for something else to be added to the tidyverse, like we'd have to be, start work now, and it would happen in a couple of years, and there's nothing on the table currently.
Ben asked a question. I think Ben maybe had to drop for another call, but so I'll ask it. But the question was, while I'm bought into developing open source packages to help deliver better processes, any advice to those of us doing that development in getting their company buy-in?
Again, it's like, how do you, you've got to give some benefit to the people using it. You've got to either remove pain or add pleasure in some way, because if you can't do that and you're not someone's direct supervisor with a lot of direct power over them, it's hard to get people to change. So I think to me, a lot of it's the way I think about the tidyverse is how do we give people some sort of quick wins so they can be motivated to do the stuff that are slower wins, where they're gonna have to learn more, learn some new ideas or some new tools, so that you kind of build up some kind of equity with that person. They build up some trust that you've helped them in the past, and now they're willing to invest a little bit more time before they see the payoff. But in the early days, it's all about delivering payoffs as quickly as possible. And I think if you're doing your my company's first star package, the easy pain points are make themes for your company corporate style guide, make a ggplot2 theme, make an Markdown Quarto theme, make a Shiny theme that people can just use to get something that's reasonably close to whatever your corporate style guide dictates. And that's just that just feels like an easy win for people, because it makes them look good inside the corporation, and because you've put in all this hard work, it's 3 seconds for them to type the right function name to get the right theme. And then I think the other bit is make it easy to get access to data. So set up some wrappers around DBI connections to the most important data sources, provide some conventions around authentication so that stuff just works, so that they're not you're not struggling, what package do I need to install? What's the password? Where's the path I need? Just give them some, a list of the top 10 most common data sources, and people will love you by and large.
Thank you. Brittany, I see your hands raised. Do you want to jump in here next?
Yeah, I actually had a similar question to Ben, and I maybe try to phrase it a little differently. So when you are thinking about sort of developing maybe that first package for your company or something of that nature, once you've identified the things that you think would be useful for people, do you have a philosophy or a way in which you approach kind of putting things together? Because I know one of the pain points is as you're developing, you realize, oh, the one I did originally doesn't quite work, and I have to tear it down and kind of build it back up again. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
have like lessons learned from developing so many packages that we could learn from.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because I think like as a team, we have got like vastly better at dealing with kind of deprecations and breakages. And I was reminded of this recently because I had to rebuild the first edition of Alpha Data Science, and it just worked. Like 5 years later, all the code in that book still works, which is certainly not like true like 5 years ago. If you tried to do that with 5 years of code in the tidyverse, it wouldn't have worked. And you know, I think that's obviously great to have that, but it's also like a huge amount of extra work to do that. And like we can kind of afford to spend that work because now we're a team of like, you know, at least my team is like 6+ full-time people who can spend our time thinking about this. Because I think there's really like when you're in an environment of like scarcity, when you've only got like so much time that you can take out of your kind of like everyday job to invest in writing a package, like it's really tough to balance like how do I like add new stuff versus making sure the old stuff continues to work. So I don't have any great advice there. I think again, some of it's about building up trust. So like give people some wins so that when you do inevitably break stuff, like either accidentally or on purpose, you've got some like kind of cushion that so people aren't going to get like really angry with you right away. They're going to be like, oh, okay, well, you know, there's a little bit of suffering now, but this person saved me so much time that it's not so bad. But yeah, it's really hard. And particularly as you're starting out, like you're going to make mistakes, like that's inevitable. And you're going to do things that when you look back a year later, you're like, why on earth did I do it that way? And now you want to like rip out the whole thing and write it from scratch. And I think that like if it feels horrible, but you have to remember like that's great because it means you've grown immensely as a programmer. And certainly if you have like my kind of mindset, you have to like resist the temptation to like rip things out and redo them as much as possible and just focus on making the next generation better rather than breaking what stuff people already have. So I don't have any great answers there, but I think you've just got to think about those tensions of like, how do I keep my forward velocity up while like getting better as a programmer, while evolving over time, but you know, things and also thinking about how do you make the things you did a long time ago better.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I see there are a few questions that mention ChatGPT. One was from Ian. Ian said, what is your opinion on how it will evolve the data scientist role in an organization?
I will caveat my remarks with I would say 99% of my ChatGPT use is entirely frivolous. I use it to make things rhyme. I use it to make things sound like pirates. I use it to make things sound like Southern grandmas who use a lot of country folk sayings. I use it to make acrostics of people's names. I use it now with the finance person I work with. I submit requests exclusively in the form of office screenplays. So I don't know, I think it's like incredibly fun for stuff like that. When I have tried to use it for programming, it's been like hit or miss. Like sometimes it's great, and sometimes it spits out something that looks like totally plausible but is utterly wrong. So it's hard for me to tell, like, is that ChatGPT today and like in a year's time it's going to be much better, or is it going to be like self-driving cars where they're kind of always coming like a year in the future and we never quite get there? Self-driving cars is something I think about a lot because I have a Tesla, and whenever I park it in the garage, it thinks the random collection of tools hanging on the wall is a semi like about to crash into us, and I'm like, it can't even handle like this, and people say we're going to have self-driving cars soon. So I don't know, it's hard for me to say. I'd say overall I'm kind of like a skeptic. I think it is going to be useful. I think it's particularly probably, it's hard for me to say, like in some ways it's going to be really useful when you're learning, because you can take the things that are words in your head and spit them out and say like, how do I rotate the x-axis labels on a ggplot, and you get something pretty reasonable, which makes it super useful for learning. But at the same time, as you're learning, it's going to spit out stuff that looks totally plausible, but is totally wrong, and you're in the worst possible situation to try and figure out what's going on. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it's super exciting. I have a lot of fun with it, but I do not use it all professionally yet.
It seems like there's a lot of people who think those are great use cases of it, the way you're using it. Let me go over here.
I will say recently, we had a company meeting recently. We had some customers come on, and I took their bios and just made ChatGPT make them rhyme, and the people were like so impressed. So impressed. I'm like, I just made ChatGPT make it rhyme. It's not that hard.
I see there's a lot of conversation beneath Yu's question. Yu, do you want to jump in here?
Hi, Hadley.
Hey.
Nice
Hi.
to meet you. Big fan of your work. So my question is, what's the implementation plan of R on cloud computing platforms? So my team works in Azure, and how to using R there is very inconvenient at best. So previously, before we moved to Azure, the work of my team, I would say 70% in R, 30% in Python. After moving to Azure, I quickly changed to 70% in Python, 30% in R. So Python is just a very natural option for modeling and analysis there. So does Posit have any plan to change this in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if change is quite the right phrase, because I don't know if we have the power to do that. But certainly, you know, what we are trying to do is make R as easy as possible to use everywhere you can possibly use it. And I think thinking about like as more and more people move to cloud computing, how can we make it easy to get set up and get configured and make things just work is really important. I know like one example at the moment is we're working on a partnership with Databricks to make using R inside Databricks clusters much easier. Certainly like this seems like there's a lot of like just challenges getting things set up there that, you know, folks have kind of solved on the Python side, and no one has put the time into on solving on the R side. So I'm hoping that, you know, as a company, we'll continue to invest in those opportunities, just make it easy to use for everyone.
Lisa, I see you had a question earlier on ggplot2. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think I asked two questions about ggplot2, but I think I'll go with the first one, which is sort of how do you feel about people contributing, having so many people contributing to that package, and like all the add-ons that have come from that, sort of like any things that sort of amazed you, and then on the opposite side, any sort of major frustrations? Yeah,
I mean, I think the thing that's kind of blows my mind about ggplot2 is it's like it's going to come up to its 18th birthday fairly soon. So I'm sort of joking about that'll be time to like emancipate it, and it's going to just have to like survive by itself from now on. And kind of realistically, like I'm not that involved in the day-to-day management of ggplot2 anymore. That torch has kind of been passed to Thomas Peterson. It was now, you know, starting to get, you know, like I guess, I don't know, 4 years ago, I was like sick of maintaining ggplot2. Maybe longer ago, I was sick of maintaining. I hired Thomas, and now Thomas is getting sick of maintaining it. So we've got to like figure out what to do next. But yeah, like maintaining something that is like so popular is, you know, both a blessing and a curse. It's like incredible to know that, you know, literally millions of people have used it, and it's helped them, you know, make graphs and make their life easier. But it also is like immensely challenging to make any changes, because like so many people rely on it now and are used to the defaults. So there's something like, I think both, I don't know if I can quickly pull this up, but like one thing I think about a little bit from time to time is just like how many people, like if I find the most popular, so the most popular page on the ggplot2 website is the G on bar documentation, which 15,000 people have read in the last month. like there are not many ways you can reach, like you can have more of an impact on people's lives than by looking at that page about bar charts and thinking, how could we make that better? But at the same time, those changes tend to be kind of small and incremental. So it's also like fun to like, you know, embark on completely new projects that no one uses. So you're free to do whatever you want. And in some ways, I think like the ecosystem of packages is kind of, it takes a combination of those strengths and those weaknesses, because like ggplot2 can like stay the same and stable, whereas you can continue to like build on top of it with these packages that fewer people use, but are also like much more easier to change and flexible. So I definitely have like mixed feelings about like this, but both like it's awesome like when people use my stuff and you know that feels so good, but it's also like, oh, now I have to like answer their questions and I can't just change things willy-nilly. So I also do like working on things that no one uses. That's also a different kind of fun.
Hadley, something that's like stood out in my mind that I've learned from you from internal company calls is how you handle focus time and the way you manage your own time. And I thought it might be helpful just to chat a little bit about that and to share how you think about that.
Yeah, one funny anecdote. I gave a talk about this idea of focus time, I don't know, a couple of years ago, probably now at the company. And I was like, I feel like the truest expression of my philosophy would be to say, no, I'm not going to give a talk about focus time because that's going to interrupt my work for the day. But I really try to like create a lot of time for like uninterrupted work, because I think, you know, like programming is like fundamentally creative work, and like finding the time to kind of like process and think things through is really important. So what I do currently is I like every day, as I said, I try and like first thing I do, like get up and write for a couple of hours or an hour at least. That's like the time of the day where I am most productive, and so I want to spend it on the things that I think are most important, you know, not the things that are necessarily most urgent. And then, you know, I have a team, so I have to talk to them, and I have to talk to my colleagues at Posit, who of course I love talking to, but it means I can't do other work. So my kind of compromise is I've blocked 2 days a week off on my calendar, Tuesdays and Thursdays, where I try really, really hard not to do meetings. You know, sometimes if there's like a bigger meeting that has like 15 people and it's impossible to find a time, otherwise I'll do it. But I really generally pretty good about keeping those days clear so I can tackle bigger problems. And I think that's, you know, really important. It's of course challenging because when you've got a big 4-hour block of time, you still have to like train yourself to like resist the temptations of TikTok and Mastodon, or certainly the temptation of Twitter has been totally removed from me these days. So I guess that's good. But certainly like you have to train yourself to like, and it's, you know, hard to like stay focused on one thing and not give in to all the other more fun distractions that you have around you. But giving yourself that space, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much. I know this hour always goes by very quickly, and there's so many great questions. So maybe I can collect those and share them with you at some point, Hadley, and we can think about how to answer them all. But another question that I'd love to ask you is, are there any books you'd recommend to this audience here, or resources you'd recommend that have been useful for you in your career?
Yeah, let me show you. Let's see if I can find the ones I like the most. I keep around. I don't know if I keep. Yeah. This is one of the books that's kind of been inspiring, or has inspired the tidyverse design book. It's called A Pattern Language. It's actually a book about architecture and how you design houses. It's just a really, like, you know, it's a very thick book, but it's designed to be kind of skimmable. I think it's sort of fun and interesting to read about. And this like system of describing all of these components at the different levels of hierarchy and how you can join them together, I think is very much connected to programming. I'll also say like one one reason I stopped reading physical books. It's like and I look at these books now and I'm like, oh my God, why is the font so small? But it's because I am becoming middle-aged and becoming increasingly short-sighted, which sucks. I don't know. I think that's the book I've been thinking about like the most lately. Some of the other ones, I guess, I've gotten rid of because I had limited book space, and I kind of like keeping these. I don't know. Also, this collection of like, fairly historical books. This is like from 1923, because there's just so much. Like when you kind of look back at what people were doing, like 100 years ago, like I think it's really revealing that in many cases, like the quality of visualizations is not improved that much. Like the quality of the best visualizations is not improved a huge amount in the last 100 years, but the ease of making them, like now you can like whip out 15 variations in ggplot in 15 minutes. Whereas before you would have had to like painstakingly draw them all out with pen and ink. So I think it's just sort of interesting to reflect on that a little bit and like what's changed really in visualization in the last 100 years.
I know we're at the end here, but maybe one inspirational question to ask you. What's something that you're most excited about as you think about maybe the tidyverse and Posit going forward?
I mean, I am like legitimately really excited about us embracing Python more. I'm still not going to be using Python, but I've went to a Python conference recently and talked to a bunch of people using Python. And I'm just excited about helping out all these Python using data scientists, because it just feels like this Posit, like it just works type stuff. There's just a huge scope for there, and I'm excited to kind of help spread that, like the Posit way of doing things, the Posit kind of community, how we think about people, and try and spread that further in the world.
Thank you so much, Hadley. Is that our new slogan? It just works.
I think it should be. We're certainly not there everywhere, but I just think that's what the best experience you can deliver is. You just try something out and it works, and people stop remarking on that because it just works. They don't have to think about that. And I think I think some of the best packages that me and my team have created are almost invisible, because they just make problems go away, and you never need to think about them. You never need to know about them, because that's just some pain you never need to experience. And then you can just listen to all the old farts cranking on about how terrible it was back in the day and how they had to trudge barefoot to school in 3 feet of snow, and just listen to their stories and be happy you don't live in that environment anymore.
Thank you so much again for joining us today, Hadley, and thank you all so much for joining the Hangout today and making this space what it is. It's pretty impressive to have over 200 people on a Zoom call and not have to worry about what's happening. And thank you all for monitoring the space too. If this was your first Hangout, we would absolutely love to have you join us again. So again, they happen every Thursday, same time, same place. I'll put the link again where you can just add it to your calendar. But next week, we'll be joined by Mike Lopez, Senior Director of Football Data and Analytics at the NFL. So he'll be our featured leader next week. And if you have any questions about it or want to reach out to me, feel free to connect on LinkedIn as well. Thank you all so much for joining today, and have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everyone. Bye.